Welcome to SmallTalk by Devarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of SmallTalk, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Scharf, who's the Mechaber of Nidberu, Chelik Aleph for now, on Devarim. Some of you listeners may be familiar with him from his involvement with Jewish music over the past few decades, but lately has taken to writing Svarim, and here we're going to discuss his new sefer Nidberu in English on the first volume, which is out now on Devarim, Parshas Devarim and Parshas V'eschanan. So thank you, Rabbi, for joining me.
Pleasure, Nachi.
So let's sort of tell the listeners about the sefer Nidberu.
Basically, this sefer is the result of a lot of notes that I've been taking on Sefer Devarim while I was learning it, and it turned and I realized that I think I hit upon something which I thought might be of interest, and should be published. And basically, it's not a pirush on Sefer Devarim. It's, as it says on the cover, it's an in-depth study of Sefer Devarim. And basically, what I concentrate on is any time that there is a discrepancy or a stira or a kasha, basically on Moshe Rabbeinu, that's who we're talking about, the entire Sefer Devarim, who's the one who's talking for 95% of Sefer Devarim. So anytime he says something which seems to be a little different than the way things actually occurred in the previous four Chumashim, that's what I'm concentrating on. So my goal with the Sefer was to reconcile. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't want it to sound like I'm being, not respectful to Sefer Devarim, but to reconcile, yes, all the discrepancies and differences and anomalies that occur throughout Sefer Devarim. It's not a pasuk by pasuk pirush. People tell me, "Oh, please get it out in time for Devarim," and I say to them, "Listen, you could pick this up any time of the year because it's topical. It's written down in chapters. Every chapter is a different topic, and not necessarily tied to Parshas HaShavua." And that was my idea, to come out with a sefer that covers most of I can't cover every single discrepancy and every single kasha, but the ones that are most famous and most glaring.
And it is reconciliation because Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, 17th century Amsterdam, has a sefer conciliador in the whole Tanakh, and he doesn't go through, as you're going through the whole Devarim, but that's what's called conciliador. It's putting them reconciliation. That's kind of going through steers in Tanakh and putting it through. So here so you really focused on Devarim because. Let's talk about Devarim a little bit. Why B'davka Devarim is something that you mentioned. Moshe Rabbeinu is giving over Devarim. It's called Mishnah Torah. Why is it called Mishnah Torah? It's something you discussed in the introduction as well. I think it's important here to highlight it. And even though you said it's not out for Devarim, only specifically for Devarim, but we're posting this here for Devarim. Devarim is starting, and people are always interested in Devarim as Mishnah Torah. People may be familiar with that name, and it's a little different. So why is Devarim called Mishnah Torah? Why focus on Devarim and Moshe Rabbeinu and the uniqueness of Devarim?
People say to me, when are you coming out with Bereshis and Shemais? And I say, no, you're missing the whole point. Bereshis and Shemais would not fit into what I'm trying to accomplish here. And that's why I always urge people to read the introduction. Most people skip introductions to Svarim or the Hagdamas and they go straight into the meat of the topic. But here it really explains why I chose Devarim, and really because it is Mishnah Torah. Because it is a review of the entire Torah based on Moshe Rabbeinu's understanding of the way it should be presented. I write in the introduction that this entire sefer, the entire Sefer Devarim, took place over a course of a few weeks, and I give a timeline as to where the other Svarim, how much time they took. Sefer Shemais was over 200 years, Sefer Rishos was over 2,000 years, and then of course you have Vayikra by Midbar, which is over the 40 years in the Midbar. But Sefer Devarim takes place really just a course of over 36 days, because this is Moshe Rabbeinu talking. You don't find anywhere in the whole Sefer Devarim where it says the pasuk Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, probably one of the most famous psukim that we say over and over again, because that's not, the Sefer Devarim is not Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe. It was Moshe, Vaydaber Moshe, and till the very end of the Sefer. But this is Moshe Rabbeinu talking, and therefore it would not be appropriate, to take this concept and extrapolate it to the other Svarim, because the other Svarim don't have that anomaly to it, and that's why I chose Sefer Devarim. It's really a standalone work, nothing to do with the other Sifrei Chumash.
And it's very in depth. As you said, this is only Parshas Devarim of V'eschanan is what's out now in one volume, 350 pages. So you really went very, very in depth. So let's go a little deeper. You talk about this reconciliation, these steers from Devarim to the other parts of the Torah. I think the best way to do this is with example, one example or two example. I'm sure you have some favorite parts of these, and these are, like you said, these are really essays and not short little vertlach either. So give the listener an example of one of these they could try to understand a little bit what you're looking to do.
Well, probably the most famous one that everyone knows about in Sefer Devarim is the Aseret Dibros, whether the Luchas says Zachar Yom Shabbos Kasher, Shabbos Yom Shabbos Kasher. Everyone knows that kasha. Everyone probably knows the Teres also, but probably not all the Turutzim that I offer in the Sefer. I found the Pnei Yeshua, which is an amazing answer to that, which I won't go into now, but I urge people to look up that chapter. But it's an amazing. That's probably the most famous one. But there are nuances throughout the Sefer, and Moshe's telling over, things that happened. For instance, the pointing of the Shoftim. If you look at the way Moshe Rabbeinu tells over how he appointed the Shoftim in Parshas Devarim, and you look at the way in Parshas Yisrael, it's completely two different stories. In Parshas Devarim, Moshe sends the idea to establish Shoftim was the idea of the Bnei Yisrael, that Bnei Yisrael came to him and suggested it. Parshas Yisrael, it's Yisrael who suggested it. The Meraglim too. In Parshas Shlach, it seems like HaKadosh Baruch Hu had the idea to send Shlach L'cha Anashim. When Moshe tells over the story, he tells them, Bnei Yisrael had the idea to send Meraglim. So these little nuances, pop up over and over and over again. They're very, very subtle, but I bring them to the front and to the fore because these are the kind of nuances that I feel like Moshe Rabbeinu was telling us something that we didn't know earlier. By the way, it's not just the stira between Sefer Devarim and other Svarim, but within Sefer Devarim itself, Moshe Rabbeinu contradicts himself sometimes. Just the Parsha of V'ahavta, which talks about the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the Parshas V'haim Shemaya. One says L'darabam, one says V'dibartabam, one says V'shinantam l'v'necha, one says V'limadatam l'v'nechem. There are different nuances and words that Moshe Rabbeinu uses to bring out different ideas, and these are glaring, and these require reconciliation. Even Rashi himself is cites himself in Sefer Devarim. One of my favorite chapters in the book is on the mitzvah Bal Taisif. And if you look at Bal Taisif, the Rashi brings down examples. In one case, of course, Bal Taisif is adding on to a mitzvah, but in one case, Rashi says adding on Chamisha Taitafais in Parshas Vaschana. In Parshas Eikav, Rashi says Chamisha Parshiyos b'tfilin. So what is Bal Taisif? Adding Taitafais, an extra one of the Taitafais? Is it one of the or is it adding an extra parsha? It's a nuance, it's a slight nuance, but it comes as a tremendous nafka minis lahalacha. Besides which, Rashi is quoting a Sifri, and the Sifri lists Dalit minim. If you bring 5 minim, it lists Birchas Kayanim. If a Kayan wants to give an extra bracha, that's Bal Taisiv. The Sifri does not list tefillin at all. And Rashi, in both instances, gives tefillin as example of a mitzvah that you could be over Bal Taisiv with, and Rashi is very difficult to understand, and that's why it's one of my favorite chapters, because I come out with a mahalach at the end, which I think is very unique, and it's my answering of trying to answer Rashi himself, why he says to himself and why he comes up with tefillin. It goes into the subject of Zakein Mamre. It's a very involved chapter, but that's a good example of a chapter where I kind of took over and didn't go with the classic Mefarshim because there aren't many people that deal with these questions specifically there. But throughout the Sefer, throughout Sefer Devarim, there are glaring differences. Obviously, all the Aseret Dibros, not all of them, but 5 out of the 10 are completely different Dibros. Atu vincha v'techa v'avdecha masu v'amtecha. And then it says, and that's in Yisrael. And Vaschana says, it gives examples of animals. It doesn't give those examples in Yisrael. What is Moshe adding with these words? What's he trying to teach us? It comes out tremendous nafka minas lahalacha, that he's telling us. And sometimes he's just filling in the blanks of things that weren't said earlier, but now is an appropriate time for him to say these things which he didn't say earlier. Sham Shafal Hirsch says that many mitzvahs, there are over 200 mitzvahs that are introduced in Sefer Devarim, which Moshe Rabbeinu did not tell us, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't tell us prior to Sefer Devarim. And Moshe Rabbeinu held them back, even though we know from Parshas Bahar that Kol HaTorah Kula was given, all the pratim were given on Har Sinai, so obviously the mitzvahs were given, but Moshe Rabbeinu held back giving them until they were about to enter Eretz Yisrael. The entire theme of Moshe's soliloquy, throughout Sefer Devarim, is geared toward the fact that within the next week, the Bnei Yisrael are going to be entering Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it required a whole new, different presentation of the mitzvahs to them. And this is very prevalent in the way Moshe Rabbeinu presented these mitzvahs in Sefer Devarim.
You mentioned there that, especially in Baltois, you have your own chiddush. How much of the Sefer is bringing down classical sources or more contemporary sources to answer up this, and how much is you bringing your own answers?
So I'm hesitant to bring my own answers because who am I to bring answers? If I have a kasha, that means someone else must have had the kasha. And if I couldn't find the answer, then I offered my own. Probably a lot of the questions that I ask that I give answers to, which I think are all very which are all appropriate answers. Maybe if I dug deeper, I would find other mefarshim that they mentioned, but I didn't go much deeper than the Rishonim and the very famous Achrayim. I didn't start digging in every single sefer, to see who'd be dealing with these issues. But if something appeared to me and came into my head, and I felt it was a chiddush that we have a right since Har Sinai, to write Chidushei Torah, because we're told, Chazal tell us that if you come up with a chiddush, it probably was told to you at Har Sinai. So when I have something that appeared to me, that came to me, and I felt it was proper and appropriate, and I ran it by Talmidei Chachamim, and they said, yeah, it was good, I put an eye in. But I would say maybe 10% or 15% of the sefer is my own, but 85% is classic Rishonim and Achrayim.
Right, and you have like those gray boxes, those familiar with the patented art scroll gray boxes, that type of thing, where you have your own stuff versus the
I didn't want to keep saying, and I think, and this is, mine, this is mine. So in the introduction, I just said, anything that's my thought is in a gray box. Happens to be that there are a lot of mistakes throughout the Sefer, and maybe I didn't show the printer clearly enough. So maybe in the second printing of this, Amir Hashem, when I release the next volumes, I'll redo it, because there are a lot of Chidushim in here that don't have gray boxes around them, and it's important to me. I want them to have the gray boxes around them.
So where do you... What kind of sources do you generally use?
Like I said, most of my sources are classic Rishonim on Chumash. If they address it, that's my go-to. That's my first go-to. Mostly Ramban and Sifarno and the classic Rishonim on Chumash. That either deal or don't deal with these questions. And if not, I'll dig a little bit deeper. One of my favorite svarim is the Sha'arei Yaron on Chumash, who does bring down many mefarshim in the Sha'arei Yaron. I have a very close relationship with Rabbi Aaron Rutter, the mechaber of the Sha'arei Yaron. He printed quite a few shtiklach Torah of mine. It's not in English. The ones I printed there are in Lashon HaKodesh. But we have a close relationship, and I run a lot of things by him. And he's a very good source, and he picks up a lot of these questions, and he brings down a lot of sources which normally is hard to find. But that's one of my favorite go-to svarim. Another favorite sefer of mine, which came out recently, is the Chumash Mikra Mefayrish, which was put out by Mesifta. Also, very good malaket, and deals with some of these nuances as well. But those are my svarim that I went to because they're likutim of Mefarshim. But I had to go to individuals as well. But these are the kind of svarim I went to see if I could find discussion of these topics in there.
So why write this in English? As should be clear from our discussion, but anyone that will see the sefer will right away see it's a serious sefer. It's not a light read. So why do you decide to do this in English rather than put it out in Lashon Kodesh?
So I decided to do it in English because since it's not short little Vertlach, and short little Divrei Torah, I felt like writing in Lashon Kodesh would be a serious sit down, because you're two steps behind the eight ball. One is A, it's not easy, and B, you're reading Lashon HaKodesh. And a lot of the audience that I'm trying to reach is more comfortable with English. English has become, a go-to language for many, many, many svarim. I mean, the art scroll is, dedicated to English. But I felt that the topic, the presentation of the answers, I was able to put my personality into it much more writing in English, because that's the way I speak, and I was able to get, I believe, a much clearer presentation in English than in Lashon HaKodesh. And I also wanted to hit a wider audience. People could just pick it up, read a chapter in English. I gave the sefer to a friend of mine this Shabbos, and he opened it up. He says, "Oh, it's in English. Thank you so much." So he's a Ben Torah, and he knows how to learn. But he was happy to be able to pick up a sefer in English, just a little easier to, I felt, presentation of these kind of topics.
Why the title Oz Nidberu?
So the reason, actually, when I wrote the Sefer, and actually some of the Haskamas referred to the Sefer as Seder HaDevarim. That was my original idea, to call it Seder HaDevarim, which for obvious reasons, because I'm being Mesader Sefer Devarim. I think one of the Rosh Hashiva from the Mir, I think in his Haskam, I think calls it Seder HaDevarim. But then I was discussing the Sefer with my dear friend Reb David Cohn's son, who's actually an editor for Art Scroll, and his brother actually, Reb Aaron Cohn, who's the Rav in Passaic. And they were just showing, and they were telling their father, who I know very well, not very well, I wish I knew him even better, but I grew up with him in Camp Monk and Reb David Cohn. And right away he said, "What's the name of the Sefer?" He said, "Seder HaDevarim." He said, "No. Ali's name is Alexander Ziskind, Aleph Zayin. Call it Oz Nidberu." So in the introduction to the Sefer, I credit him with the name of the Sefer, even though I think most of your readers, and surely you know, there is another Sefer called Oz Nidberu. And I brought this up to Reb David Cohn, and I said, "Could I call it Oz Nidberu if there's another Sefer Oz Nidberu?" And he said, "I'll give you a list of Svarim that are double named. It's not unique. That's the name of the Sefer, and that's what it is."
And what about Haskamas? Who did you get Haskamas from for the Sefer?
So I got my in order the way they're printed. My first Sefer is from Yerucham Olshin, who I have a very close relationship with. Throughout many years, I was on the board of Beis Medrash Gavaya, and I was on the board during the explosion of the campus. And my job on the board was actually chairman of the building committee for BMG. But that was just a segue to get close to. I didn't learn in BMG. I learned in Long Beach and I learned in the Mir, and in Chaim Berlin. But I got very close with the Rosh Yeshiva through being a member of the board and being very involved in the day-to-day growth of the yeshiva, and so Rabbi Yerucham Olshin, the Rosh Yeshiva BNG, gave me a beautiful haskama. For the Mir Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Lezer Yodel Finkel, I have a haskama. Someone also I know very well, involved in the yeshiva, was much closer with his father, but he also gave me it. But Rabbi Daniel Stein, who's a Rav of my shul here on the Upper West Side, who's a rising, I wouldn't say rising, his star has arisen already, and his sefer, maybe you know it, is Chamudei Daniel on Chumash, which is a brilliant sefer on Chumash, and he's my Rav, and he gave me a beautiful one. But the one that Reb David Cohn, of course, I mentioned earlier, but the most surprising one I got was from Reb Surli Borenstein, who I got very close with through his shiurim, and I told him that I really, really wanted his haskam, and it happens to be that a lot of his raid bites are in my sefer, coincidentally, because the topics that he talked about, quite a few of them were in the sefer, and he even mentioned my sefer on his shiur a couple of times, and I'm very, very proud and happy, and I hope Reb Surli is listening to this, and very, very excited and happy that I got his michtav bracha, on the sefer as well. Another one is from Rabbi Yamin Greengrass. I don't know, he's not that well known here in the States, but he's a huge Talmud Chacham and a big Asken Eretz Yisrael, and he knows tremendous amount, and he read pretty much a lot of the Sefer, and he's very involved in it. But I have a letter here from Ephraim Galinsky, who's on the rabbinical board of Yated, of Mishpacha magazine, and he read every single word because he actually edited it, did some editing for me as well, and his letter really speaks to every word of the Sefer, where he wrote that he just loved editing it because he felt it changed his relationship with the Sefer Devarim. That's what he told me. Yeah, that's what he wrote. Yeah.
I don't know if that's Shruli's first haskama, but Shruli did tell me privately that he spoke very highly of the Sefer and he enjoyed it very much. So, he definitely, other than the haskama, the michtav bracha. So, who would you say the Sefer is meant for?
So, it's meant for. It's a hard question. The fact that it's in English definitely expanded the boundaries of who would have read it otherwise. But it's definitely meant for someone who is really, really, who loves to learn Chumash. Learning Chumash has become a lot more popular, in the Yeshiva Shavelt, and everyone, always learn Parashat Shavua, but learning Chumash Be'iyun has become very, very popular, and it's become something that has to be addressed. So I think that that this Sefer is like, if you're interested in delving deeper into Sefer Devarim and you love learning Chumash and you love these topics, it's really for B'nai Torah. I mean, it's not an easy read. It's not a coffee table book. It requires concentration. It requires, to go through from beginning to the end of each chapter in order to get the full picture. But I would think it belongs to anyone who would have rendered in Lashon HaKodesh. It just happens to be in English.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is only on Parshas Devarim and Parshas V'eschanan, so you have 2 parshas and 350 pages. When is the next volume planned to come out, and how many volumes are you anticipating in this series on Devarim?
So I think what I'm not going to do is address all those mitzvahs that are introduced in Sefer Devarim, which don't appear earlier, because that's not a stira. Unless there's a very, very glaring reason why Moshe did it that way for certain mitzvahs, but I'm not going to address every single one of the 200 mitzvahs, and this would become a 20-volume endeavor. But I do think that based on, and I'm already finishing up volume 2. I think it'll be 5 volumes by the time it's finished. I hope to get it down to 4 volumes. I don't want to make it too expensive for the people to buy, but that's not the issue. But I do want it. I do want to keep it as concise as possible. But I think it will end up being 5 volumes. By the way, I had one chapter translated already into Hebrew, into Lashon HaKodesh, because I plan on printing it in a different publication. Someone asked me for it, and in my Sefer, let's say it took 12 pages, but in Lashon HaKodesh it took only 6 pages or 5 pages. As you know, Lashon HaKodesh is much more concise. So English does tend to make things, more lengthy. But that's why it'll be 5 volumes.
Okay. So if someone is interested now, they heard about this podcast, they're like, that sounds really interesting, I want to check this Sefer out. How can they get a copy now for Devarim?
So I'm not selling it in stores yet. It's not being distributed because I was told by my publisher that I should not distribute it as a single standalone Sefer because people don't want to buy something that's not going to be completed. I think the Frankel Rambam got away with that. And maybe the Encyclopedial Talmudist got away with it too, because everyone knew there are more volumes coming out. But he said that I should wait until I have a second volume, and then people will know that it's going to be completed, and then people would be much more interested in buying it. So I hope within 6 months from now, volume 2 will be completed, and then I'll release to the stores both of these. But if anyone wants a copy, the Sefer was reviewed in the Yated, and I put my email address there. And if anyone wants a copy, I'm more than happy to free of charge to send it to anyone who wants a copy of the Sefer.
Well, that's very nice, very generous. That's definitely a very interesting Sefer for those interested in learning Torah. Seriously, what's your email? Do you want to say the email address, and I could put in the show notes also for anyone who's interested in reaching out to you who wants a copy?
Yeah, my email address is ali545, and I'm going to date myself at AOL.com. So that's my email address, and if anyone would like a copy, email me. I could either send a hard copy or I could send a digital copy. I have it in digital form. You could just, get it on WhatsApp and click it open, and you have the whole Sefer right in front of you as well. Depending on how many people respond, I'll decide how to distribute it that way.
Okay, so I'll put your email address in the show notes as well for those interested. And thank you, Rabbi Ali, for joining me to talk about Nidberu on Devarim.
Thank you for having me, and I hope to join you soon for Volume 2.
Bez Hashem. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.